You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast with your hosts Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast for the Week 9 recap with your wonderful hosts Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton on the mic here after a very exciting and albeit low-scoring week for a lot of teams here. Not a lot of fantasy football explosions out of the usual suspects, but we do have a lot of interesting wins and losses here for this week. Some people making some playoff pushes, some people maybe falling out of playoff favor here. Pat, what were your overall thoughts for Week 9?
I don't really know that I had too many. I mean, it was kind of like a boring ho-hum kind of week. Like you said, the scores were not very high. Lots of backup quarterbacks, like we talked about last week. So nothing really stands out to me. That I don't think there were any significant injuries. So just kind of a, boring week.
Yeah, and let me just say I am glad that we are not doing this podcast dressed up this week. That was awful. I was sweating. It was a mess. So I'm glad to be back and seeing Patrick's regular face here, not whatever he was last week. I think you said Squid Games last week.
Squid Game. Yeah, and I've got a couple others. I mean, if people would prefer to see not my face, we could make that happen. That'd be fine.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that, so we're going to take silence as golden here at the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast. So let's just get started here with our first matchup here, and that would be your matchup. You with the high score this week of 134-52. We got some sound effects today, boys and girls. So that's going to mess me up every time I play a sound effect. 134.52 to 98.98 for Brian here. Pat, you now go to 6-3 on the season, now number 2 in the Beltway Wars Invitational standings, and Brian drops to 3-6 on the year here. Just looking at your squad, I know we talked about, me and Pat had a little bit of a bonfire kind of thing on Friday night, and we were talking about Aaron Jones. Look at him. He's finally back. 20 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown, and actually gets involved in the passing game. Does lose a fumble, but you love to see the 20 carries here. That is beautiful for you to see out of Aaron Jones, a high draft pick this year. Very good for him. Saquon Barkley, 16 carries, 90 yards, and a really bad game for that Giants offense, but he gets his points in this game. Nico Collins, 3 for 5, 54 yards, and a touchdown on the day. TJ Hawkinson doesn't really care about the quarterback change here. Still gets 12 targets on the day, 7 catches, 69 yards. And CeeDee Lamb, really the resurgence here. 11 for 16, 191 yards. Almost gets in the end zone there at the end of the game. Would have really exploded his point total here, but does get 22 points on the day. And last but not least, Cleveland here. I was looking at this. I actually made a screenshot of it. 58 yards allowed in an NFL game is kind of crazy. 2 interceptions, 7 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery for 27 points on the day. I'm just going to let you take it away here, Pat. What did you think? I know you weren't as high on this week as I think you should have been. So what did you feel about Week 9 here?
Well, first of all, a lot to say here, actually. Number one, I was waiting for a sound effect. I thought I was going to get a sound effect, and I was going to I think there's a Whose Line Is It Anyway game since we were watching this recently.
Yeah, you have
Isn't there
be,
one where
you have to be
is it called
stream.
Sound Effect?
Yes.
Right. So
you're not going to hear the sound effects.
Sound
You're not going to hear the sound effects. You're going to have to listen to the podcast to hear the sound effects.
Oh, so we really could do the Whose Line game where you play something and I don't know what it is, and I have to what would I do? Do a hand signal or do something?
We could really extend this podcast, and I could explain every single sound effect I played. For you, I played the anime wow. It goes wow based on your score.
Wow. Okay. Well, I indeed. Well, I wasn't wowed. In fact, I didn't realize I had the top score until just literally 2 minutes before this podcast started. Because 134 points is typically not the number that you need to get that max. But hey, I'm happy.
Maybe
I'm
when we played
totally
standard, but not half point PPR.
not half point PPR. So I'm quite glad. Yeah, wild game with the Browns and the Cardinals, and more than anything, I'm grateful that James Conner is in my IR slot. That Emilio DeMarcado was out in this game. I'm sorry, Imari DeMarcado. I always screw that one up. And Keontae Ingram, 9 carries for 8 yards on my bench. So very glad that those Cardinals running backs were on the bench or out for this one because those Browns, 27 fantasy points. It's part of the reason I wasn't in love with this week for me, even though it was great. The Browns put up 27. I would have liked to get some more out of like Metcalf, granted a tough matchup. Nico Collins kind of was hoping that he would sort of follow up on his performance last week, and he somewhat did, but 3 for 5, 54 yards. I don't know. I'm kind of waiting for these guys to really put it together. But the volume is what I'm happy with for some of the studs on this team. You mentioned CeeDee Lamb, 22 fantasy points. What I'm most happy with is that 16 targets in this one. He's had 14 and 16 in back-to-back weeks now, which are his 2 highest of the season in terms of target share in that offense. Furthermore, Hawkinson, 12 targets. You thought with Kirk Cousins going down, the late trade, it ends up being Dobbs coming into this game because of yet another injury to Jaren Hall. He comes in and actually helps Hawkinson with 7 for 12 and 69 yards receiving there. And you mentioned Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley, 20 carries for Aaron Jones. Big sigh of relief for me. Saquon Barkley continues to dominate touches, 16 carries. So, I mean, every week I say it's about those 2 guys. It's about their health. And if they're getting this kind of workload, I'm feeling pretty good in second place here going into week number 10.
Yeah, I would say a lot of things are coming together for you here. Even with Tua again struggling here, you have Aaron Jones now coming back 20 carries, Saquon still being a stud here, and it's really CeeDee Lamb after a couple down weeks at the beginning of the season has now really commanded a lot of targets in that offense with Dak Prescott playing much better. That air attack as a whole has really come together. So great to see there. CeeDee's probably a top 6 wide receiver going forward, I would say. So you love to see that. Your bench has a little bit to be desired. You're holding a lot of Arizona running backs, which is fine. Roschon Johnson, it's kind of been a disappointment, and now with Khalil Herbert coming back, that is just going to hurt his stock even further. Jaylen Warren, though, 11 carries, 88 yards. Definitely someone you could probably throw in your flex in a tight spot here. But my main question for you is, a couple of weeks ago, you made the trade for DK Metcalf. How are you feeling about this trade now with how Brian Robertson has done there in Washington? I mean, are you still just hopeful for the trade to work? I mean, obviously, I don't think we would say that it's been strictly beneficial for you, but are you still hopeful, or are you truly concerned about DK Metcalf's production going forward?
No, I'm not too worried about it. I mean, he's going against a defense in the Ravens that continues to just get better and better and better. This defense is drawing comparisons to some of the great elite Ravens defenses of the past. And so I kind of take that worth a grain of salt. And in his last 2 games prior to that, 9 targets and 14 targets. So I think he's still very involved in the game plan here. I think he just missed a big play in that Baltimore game. I think he had a couple chances to really put some points on the board. He goes 4 for 50 in this one. So I think the volume will still be there. In terms of running backs, like I said, I was kind of hoping and planning on Jones and Barkley being healthy, getting back to health by trading Robinson out. And James Conner, we should mention, on IR, will be back rather soon. I don't think it's this week. I think it's the next week, and has some decent matchups. The only real tough one on the schedule left for him is week 15 against San Francisco, but lots of potentially favorable matchups. And he did have a really great start to the season. Had a couple really nice weeks, was dominating carries. And I mean, the current crop of running backs for the Cardinals do not inspire confidence. So I think he'll be back to a bell cow role when he's back.
Yeah, and I will say two things here. Geno Smith, I think, is in danger of being benched for Drew Lock, so that would be interesting to see with DK Metcalf's value if they can get better quarterback play there in Seattle. And I'll also say for James Conner, you do have Kyler Murray coming back, which is going to stretch the field out. Maybe it gives you more running room for James Conner. So good to see there. We go over to Brian's team here, 98.98. It's so loud. Hold on. They're still laughing. Okay. He goes to 3-6 on the season, scores under 100 points on the day. Looking at his squad here, Jalen Hurts has a good game here, but does get hurt in this game. I don't think it's anything too serious. Does get 25 points here. The Eagles do have a bye coming up, so he will get extra rest for that knee. Throws 2 touchdowns, has a rushing touchdown on the day here. Breece Hall probably should have had a better day. 16 carries, 50 yards, was kind of game scripted out of that game. He's starting Kareem Hunt here, who does get in the end zone, but doesn't really get involved in the passing game. Didn't really need to. The defense of the Browns was really dominating that game against Arizona, so they didn't really need to do much there. Terry McLaurin, 5 for 7, 73 yards. Douglas here, Demario Douglas, kind of a spot start for Brian here, 5 for 7, 55 yards. Travis Kelce here, 3 for 4, 14 yards. Not a great showing there. And Josh Downs goes out of this game with 1 for 1, 10 yards on the day. Brian now at 3-6 on the season. Can only really afford one more loss here. We're just looking at his squad here. I got a question for you. Travis Kelce is the 38th overall player in fantasy football. Was he overdrafted?
Personally, yes. But then again, I'm just not somebody who even likes taking them in the first round, even if I'm picking toward the back. I always feel not great when I do it.
Yeah.
But I would venture a guess to say, yeah, Brian maybe wishes he had that one back, given his 3-6 start here. But I don't know. What can you say? I mean, he's still the number 1 tight end. He's had a couple down weeks, but
I mean, looking at the draft, I mean, I think Jefferson went number 1, right?
Yes.
So you get Chris McCaffrey at 2. I think you'd rather have Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'd rather have,
it was definitely the shock of the draft. I was just wondering, with the 38th overall player, yes, he is the number 1 tight end, but tight ends are historically bad this year, I would say. He has the best one. It's just where's the value? And I think that he was a tad bit overdrafted at the number 2 spot.
Look, if you want to grab him at 6 or 7, sure. But I think the fact that there were, I would say at that time, 2 elite running backs.
Yeah.
And 3
Jamar Chase
to 4
Tyreek
elite wide receivers. Yeah, Jefferson, maybe you'll make the argument for Kupp.
Yeah.
But you got McCaffrey and Eckler up there, and then beyond that, it's Bijan, who's, I would say, a tier down. So at the time, I think there were 5 surefire players that I would take over Kelce. So, yeah, I overdrafted.
Yeah, so in 3-6 here, Brian's kind of in dire straits here. Looking at his bench here, Javonte Williams was on bye, Brock Purdy was on bye. You're not starting him for Hurts, but you are starting him next week. Does have Khalil Herbert here, which should get a lot of run in this offense now with Khalil Herbert and Justin Fields coming back all at the same time. So you do have some reinforcements in the wings here, probably putting Khalil Herbert for, I would say, Josh Downs in case he's out for an extended period of time. So does have some players here that he can fill in here. It just, can he win out and make it into the playoffs? And I will say this, Brian, you're the one that voted against divisions. Maybe if you were in a weak division, you'd still be only 1 or 2 games out of a division lead and could get into the playoffs. So that is definitely hurting you this year.
I think, Brian, well,
go ahead.
I think I think Brian's argument. Well, I think it wouldn't make a difference.
Okay.
It wouldn't make a difference. I think that's what Brian will say, but because divisions are randomized anyway, just like anything. So regardless, yeah, Javonte Williams is going to be back. He needs everything to go right now for him to put some wins on the board. He needs Javonte Williams to be the version of Javonte Williams that we saw in the week before the bye against Kansas City, where he went 27 for 85, 27 carries, which was like almost double any other week for him in terms of rush attempts. So he comes back. He's got a game against Buffalo, who's not great against the run. He's also got Khalil Herbert coming back from IR perhaps next week. Now that backfield is complicated as anything, I should know. So there are potentially 3 guys there who may be in some sort of a timeshare, depending on health. So I don't know. I mean, it sucks to lose this one to go to 3-6. You get a really nice game out of Jalen Hurts, totally accustomed to that, but just get kind of middling, mediocre, just maybe hitting par for some of these guys, like a McLaurin, like a Douglas. These guys, just couldn't get into the end zone, couldn't get over 50 or 60 receiving yards.
Right.
Kareem Hunt's in a timeshare there. His 14 carries may actually be a lot compared to what he may get in future weeks. I have a feeling that number may go down as Jerome Ford gets even healthier. And to top it all off, and I said this in the text thread, Taylor Swift didn't travel to Germany. And honestly, is there a more clear explanation for a 2.9 fantasy point showing than Kelsey's lover not making a trip
Taylor
with
Swift
him?
is at least a 7-point fantasy football swing, I would say.
At least 100%.
Okay, so
100%.
let's go over to our next matchup here. That would be Charlie defeating Alex, 133.30.
Do you happen to have a Taylor Swift on your soundboard? Do you have any Taylor Swift?
No, because that is DMCA,
No, okay.
so I do not want this podcast to get taken down. So, and she is infamous for that. So we're not messing with you, Taylor. We love you. But
I don't think she cares that we're stealing listens to her song. In fact, I think we would probably, if we put on the podcast, I guarantee you, Charlie would have Taylor Swift blasting right afterwards. So,
that's fair.
Just saying.
All right, so back to the matchup here. Charlie goes to 4-5 on the season, 133.30. Charlie really gave the taser to Alex today. Oh my God, it's not going to load.
I guess that was supposed to be. I can do the taser sound.
There it goes. I'll do it again. Really, the taser to Alex here, who now goes to 1-8 on the season.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine, and you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Yeah, so Alex now goes to 1-8. You're going to be really surprised what sound I played right there. But let's go to Charlie's team here. Even with a down day from Patrick Mahomes here, 15 points here, still has enough players to make up the difference. Derrick Henry, with all this Tajay Spears talk here, still gets 17 carries, 75 yards, and a touchdown. Nice day there. Jacoby Myers back from the grave with a new management there in Las Vegas. 1 for 17, gets a touchdown. 2 for 8 through the air for 38 yards. Jonnu Smith here really taking over the role for Kyle Pitts. He actually gets a carry here, which was shocking. 5 for 6, 100 yards to the air, and a touchdown. I feel like Arthur Smith is just like trolling us now, giving him a carry instead of Bijan. So with that,
a jet sweep. I think it was a jet sweep.
No, he's trolling us. So also here in his flex spot, Cam Akers goes out for the season with an Achilles injury. Scores 5 points there. And Young Wei Koo, I can't believe I didn't even know how to say that, gets 19 points here. And Oakland also gets 19 points here. So gets a lot of points out of maybe some overlooked roster spots in terms of the kicker and defense on his way to a 133.30 win.
Yeah, I mean, Jonnu Smith, my goodness. I mean, outplaying Pitts by a lot. What a week. I mean, this is a huge victory for Charlie to keep him in contention 4-5. You said he gets the kind of the relatively down week for Patrick Mahomes, 15 fantasy points. There's not too many players that would put up 15 across fantasy football that you would be too disappointed in, but sort of a relatively low total for Patrick Mahomes in this one. Derrick Henry continues to defy the odds, 17 for 75 in this one, gets into the end zone, also catches 3 passes, so a really nice day for Derrick Henry. He continues to dominate the game, any game that he plays in. He only plays 50% of this game. So kind of interesting that his snap percentage is so low.
Can
But
I just stop you on Derrick Henry here? Everyone's talking about Tajay Sharp. And Derrick Henry, last 3 games, 18, 14, 17. You're going to take that out of your running back. So until we see that Tajay Sharp, 20-point game, you're not worrying about this. And every fantasy football analyst is saying, hey, pick up Tajay Sharp. He's getting the snaps. I think that's mostly just for pass pro. And I think that he's probably just a little better at that. So Henry's still getting the run here. So kind of ignore the noise in terms of Tajay Sharp.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think a lot of the noise in recent weeks has been the possibility of Henry getting traded, which he almost was. And there's always the fact that, it seems like Spears is kind of that handcuff that is the really talented rookie that's just waiting for his shot, that Derrick Henry was once upon a time. So if Derrick Henry gets hurt, I think Spears has a ton of value as immediately a top 15 running back. Okay. Maybe top 12, top 15. I think definitely top 15. So I don't know. Still a valuable backup, but really nice week for Charlie. He puts up great points. Jordan Addison, a little bit concerned still about the depth here, and some fringe starters like Jordan Addison. I shouldn't say he's a fringe starter, but he may be now with the change at quarterback. He at least is able to go 5 for 7 in this weird game with the combination of Jaren Hall and Josh Dobbs. You hope that Dobbs, Charlie should be happy that they traded for Josh Dobbs and didn't rely on some combination of Jaren Hall, and I think they have, what's his name, Nick? Is it Nick Mullen that they have? That's the other option when he comes back to from injury. So it should be Dobbs, and that's good news for Addison.
100% here. Just finishing up Charlie's team here. Looking at his bench, you have Zach Evans and Bobo here, both healthy scratches on the day, so they're probably safe to be droppable in the following weeks. A name that is kind of interesting here is Khalil Shakir. He's been getting a lot of run recently in this Buffalo offense. He's kind of taking away kind of the Gabe Davis role a little bit. Josh Allen is looking for him. So just kind of an interesting name to keep an eye on in the next couple of weeks, see if he gets an expanded role. Does go 4 for 4, 57 yards in their loss against Cincinnati. So just an interesting name just to keep in mind. Maybe throw him in a flex spot here with Cam Akers going out.
Yeah, and we shouldn't discount Tyler Boyd, although he isn't kind of an easily overlooked player. Lately he's been good for 3 or 4 catches for 4 or 5, 40 or 50, 60 yards, something like that. So, he's been somewhat of a reliable in a half-point PPR league for that 7 to 10 fantasy point range. So with bye weeks, you may need to throw him in there. There are worse options than Tyler Boyd for sure. And that Bengals offense continues to improve as the year goes on.
Okay, let's go over to our loser here, who has now lost, get this, 8 straight games.
Ooh.
8 straight losses for Alex here. Just been a really horrible season for him. Very unlucky. Starts Jordan Love here. I mean, a fringe starter, maybe, probably a quarterback 2. Only gets 13 points here. Bijan Robinson continues not to be used. Does lose a fumble here, so it's kind of concerns is he in the doghouse or not. He was probably already in the doghouse just based on his usage. Only gets 4.9 points. That's not good out of your first-round draft pick. Joshua Jacobs, though, looks good. 26 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's more what we saw last year. But then we get into the problems here. The wide receivers, just looking on buys here, he didn't really have any wide receivers of note on buy. Went with George Pickens, -1 yards. Elijah Mitchell for only 14 yards. T. Higgins does have a nice day here, but that's kind of been an outlier based on recent production. So like to see that, but just nothing out of his 2 and 3 wide receivers. I'm really concerned about George Pickens, especially with Deontay Johnson coming back. He looks like the preferred option for Kenny Pickett in that offense. So, and I don't know if you saw that when Deontay Johnson called the touchdown, it looked like George Pickens was really upset, which is kind of like, we getting like a little bit of toxic player here. Don't like to see that there. Just a really rough season for Alex. Not really much to say. Ferguson does have he was a nice little find there for Alex. I don't think he drafted him. No, he's added from free agency. So good on Alex there for continuing to try to be a spoiler for a lot of the playoff teams.
Yeah, those wide receivers, it's just brutal. I mean, I totally agree with everything you said on George Pickens. Talented player, but man, Deontay Johnson commands a serious target share in Pittsburgh. And
it seems just like Pickens just gets in his own head. And then once he's in his own head, it's just like I don't know if you saw that touchdown or not touchdown catch where it's like, you got to get that. You got to get your feet in. I mean, he had about 2 feet and he just didn't get his feet in. So I think he just gets in his head and it's not going to be good going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, same for Elijah Moore here. I mean, Cleveland's passing game is coming around a little bit. Deshaun Watson actually has not been that bad these last few weeks. In fact, 4 straight weeks. But Moore just continues to be the play second fiddle and even third fiddle. You've got Kareem Hunt, who's catching passes. You've got David Njoku, who's having a bit of a midseason resurgence. And you've got Amari Cooper, who is dominating. I mean, Cooper has been great, especially this week. Cooper had a really fantastic performance in week 9. So I don't know, just still depth issues on this team. You do get 5 for 6, 82 from Darnell Mooney on the bench, who has always been talked about as kind of a guy who has been waiting to take off. Maybe there's something toward the end of the year. His snap percentages are up by about 10% over the last 2 weeks compared to prior, and 6 targets this week. So maybe there's something to be said there for Mooney. Curtis Samuel in the IR slot, who, of course, was playing really well, another midseason resurgence, and unfortunately winds up on IR for Alex in this game.
Yeah.
But, man, just really unfortunate. Jordan Love kind of, you've got, especially when you've got Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff on the bench, you're like, man, if I can just get this 1 week of Jordan Love, and he okay, but not enough to come even close to Charlie here. I mean, I guess the only real positive thing is Josh Jacobs continues to be a monster in the backfield. 21 fantasy points, 26 carries is his high on the season. Of course, this is the game script that's not going to be common for the Raiders, who beat the awful Giants. Is there a worse team in the NFL than the New York Football Giants? I think there is not.
Yeah. It just going back to Elijah Moore for a second. It just seems like that defense is so good they're either going to blow teams out and he's not going to be used, and the passing attack is not good enough to support a second wide receiver. Just kind of unfortunate there. I could see this team starting 2 tight ends, one in the flex, one in the tight end spot with George Kittle and what's his first name? Jake Ferguson there. Definitely 2 productive tight ends. So maybe we'll see that in the future. And I think you have to start thinking about benching Bijan Robinson for the Swift here. It's just the usage. I mean, it's just 11 carries. He needs way more than that. And I mean, you're probably just riding with him for now, just to the end of the season since you're not really playing for anything. But man, I don't think there's been a more disappointing first round draft pick than Bijan.
Why are you benching Bijan for Swift? They both played in this one and should be able to be in the lineup moving forward.
Well, what I'm saying is that you might want to put Kittle in your tight end and then Ferguson in your flex, and then you start Jacobs and Swift.
Oh God, no! I wouldn't do that. You would do that. You'd start Ferguson in the flex. Tight ends are so up and down. Oh my gosh.
But that was
No.
I would say that maybe I wouldn't do it, but that even that it's a conversation, I would say that just shows how bad Bijan Robinson's been this year. He is the number 14, so maybe I am wrong, but let's like he has these games of like 4 points, point three. You know, that was the headache game. 8. You know, it's just like his usage should be much higher than it is with how talented he is. It's just not there uh, in that Arthur Smith offense.
Of course, yeah. But it's a disappointment for where he's drafted,
Yeah.
but I think he still has to be in there. I mean,
Okay.
he's going to break out. Arthur Smith is going to change his mind. You don't want to be the player that sits Bijan Robinson when his
That's
breakout
true.
arrives.
Much like Aaron Jones, you're just waiting for that blow up. But I'm trying to create some conversation, so here we are. Let's go over to our next matchup here. That would be Jake versus Mike here. Jake with his third win on the season. Okay, we got the victory sound there. I'm gonna laugh at every single one of these.
I think what I should start doing is I should just start doing charades, like,
Yeah.
and see how
Maybe
close they are.
I'll
to
put
the,
my finger up and then you can just dance to it.
yeah, maybe.
So Jake gets his third win on the season. Mike here goes to 5-4. This is one of these teams that we were talking about that maybe he can survive while the reinforcements come back. But he scored only 84 points this week. Defeated. You didn't dance. Okay, but he was defeated this week with only 84 points. Let's go over to Jake here. Dak Prescott, kind of the resurgence here from earlier this season when I had him, of course. Goes 29 of 44, 374, 3 touchdowns against a tough Eagles defense. You got Rashad White here, 20 carries, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 25 points. Chris Olave gets in the end zone here on 6 for 8, 46 yards. You got Cole Kmet, who scores 2 touchdowns against the Saints. In their loss, Najee Harris here, 16 carries, 69 yards, does get in the end zone here. So a lot of positives here for Jake, and now he's 3-6, so he's back in that conversation, right? Maybe he's trying to make a push here. Definitely has some talent here. A player that we haven't been talking about a lot is Zach Moss. Does have a disappointing game here, but the reinforcements are coming back. Christian McCaffrey was on bye. Even has kicker on bye. Some other players on bye here, so definitely has some talent coming back. And when your first round draft pick is on bye and you get a win, you got to be happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And Dak Prescott, you mentioned, I mean, 3 touchdowns. Did a little bit of work in the rushing game, not much, but 29 for 44 through the air, 28 fantasy points. Really a nice game here for Prescott. And I agree. The guys you pointed out continue to sustain momentum and are playing really well. I mean, starting right there from Rashad White, who has really come on these last couple weeks. He now has 3 straight back-to-back double-digit performances, including this one, 20 carries, gets into the end zone twice, and finishes with 25, almost 26 fantasy points. So really great to see the continued performances from White. Olave, a little bit of a bounce back. He's had some really rough weeks, a rough stretch recently in the last 5 or 6 games. He goes 6 for 8. He gets into the end zone. Love to see that. Kmet, big fantasy game. He's so hit or miss, but he's tight end number 5, which is just crazy to me for Cole Kmet in that tight end slot. So, yeah, I mean, hey, sustaining, as you mentioned, McCaffrey being out on bye this week. The Seahawks putting up a -2 against Baltimore in the defense slot to put up 127 points. Given everything, I think is a really nice win for Jake, and he needs to keep winning. He's a little bit in the Brian position of you've really got to put together like a string of victories here. And hey, you got to start with one, and this was a good one to get for Jake.
Yeah, 100% here. Like I said, did have Christian McCaffrey on bye. Christian Watson still continues to struggle, but I do think that there is some upside there. Hopefully Jordan Love can get that offense figured out for Christian Watson. That's really the player that's really going to put Jake over the top if he can figure it out. You swap in Christian Watson for Romeo Doubs. Maybe Christian Watson has a resurgence from last year when, at the back end of the season, he really exploded. Maybe that is in store for Christian Watson. So interesting to see there, but definitely an interesting team, I would say. A lot of talent and can explode like it did this week. So definitely dangerous going forward. But
Before we move off of this team, I have to ask you this on Zach Moss. Is he startable at the moment?
So we talked about this last week, right? Where we thought he was. So last 4 games, right? 14, 6, 13, and 2. He has New England next week. Let's see. Rashad White, you're definitely playing. Who's his flex? Najee Harris, you're probably playing. And then you have Christian McCaffrey, so you're not starting him next week, for sure. I feel like he could explode, but he also has the opportunity to have 26 yards as well. And I think we talked about that with Jonathan Taylor now coming back, getting more full strength. Didn't have a off-season Jonathan Taylor, so probably it's going to take him a couple of weeks to really get going. It looks like he's finally gotten going. So expect a regression for Zach Moss. Maybe a usable flex if you need him in a pinch, but definitely not that RB1 that we were seeing earlier in the season.
Yeah, he when Taylor came back, Moss dropped from 80% to 50% of snaps. 2 straight games of 50, then went down to 39, and now it's down to 21 in a favorable matchup against Carolina, where they, I guess they had the lead in this one, right?
Yeah.
I didn't watch too much. So opportunities
You're
for him.
You're telling me you didn't watch Colts Carolina? That wasn't the one game on your TV?
Wasn't the best one. Wasn't the best one.
Okay, let's go over to Mike here. Now 5-4 on the season. But as we've been talking about for weeks and weeks here, the reinforcements are almost back here. But let's look at his starting roster here. Josh Allen, 24 points. QB number 1 probably. Is number 1 overall player, also mind you. So absolute stud there, does stud things. Has to start Ezekiel Elliott here. Only gets 4.7 points. Just taking a peek at his bench here. Travis Etienne will buy, so you kind of had a spot start for Ezekiel Elliott there. Brian Robinson, who you had, 18 carries, 63 yards, and a touchdown. 11 points there. Mike Thomas, I know we were kind of talking him up as maybe a wide receiver 3. Goes 0 for here, only 1 target on the day. Has to start Mingo here. Jonathan Mingo only goes 1 for 4, 5 yards. DJ Moore also has a very disappointing game with a fumble loss in that game against the Saints. Some good news, though. Dalton Schultz, 10 for 11, 130, and a touchdown in that shootout with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And C.J. Stroud looks like the real deal, so Dalton Schultz value definitely goes up from this game. Tight end number 8 on the year. Just kind of a rough week. Had a lot of buys here. A lot of injuries, as we know. Achane looks like he's trending towards a Week 11 return. So he's on bye this week. Looks like he's going to be back Week 11. So reinforcements are on the way. If you could look up Justin Jefferson, I think that he won't be back this week, but I think next week is a possibility as well. So in 1 week, he could get back Devin Achane and Justin Jefferson in the same week.
Potentially. It seems like they're just mentioning that. Sorry, the water jug is distracting me a little bit there, but his 21-day window opens, right? So he can come back anytime in the next 21 days, right? But that's 3 weeks, so it doesn't give you too much clarity there. So we'll see. I mean, he really, really, really needs these guys back. Treylon Burks leaves this game, not expected to play next week, so. He's down another guy there in Treylon Burks. So, I mean, you're
probably starting Mike Thomas, Christian Kirk, who's on bye, and DJ Moore, which none of those players are truly inspiring.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the flex, maybe there's it needs a flex as well, I think.
Yeah.
Well, ETN will come back. So, at 5-4, still in good shape, but probably after this one, you're really like, oh man, the nerves are starting to creep in maybe a little bit for Mike. He probably should take a drink to quiet those nerves a little bit. I think he owes us one.
No, he
Right?
doesn't.
Is it?
No, it's
not
Dustin
Mike.
this week.
Oh, it's Dustin. Dustin scored less than 84. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, have a drink anyway, Mike. You'll need it, and luckily your medicine. You will take your medicine once Jefferson and A-Chain and A-Chan and ETN are back relatively soon. ETN, of course, on bye. I agree. 100% cosign on Dalton Schultz. 10 for 11. This Cowboys offense looks explosive like it did early on in the season.
Texans.
Sorry, Texans.
I know
his
headshot look. He's in a
his
Dallas
headshot
uniform.
is Cowboys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's weird.
it's Ferguson in Dallas, and
There you
it's
go.
the other Texas town. But that offense looks equally as explosive. CJ Stroud has looked really, really, really good the last couple of weeks, and Schultz has been a huge beneficiary. That's 7 or more targets in 3 of the last 4. So the work is there. The Texans offense is proving to be a successful one, yeah, I think Mike will be just fine. Again, we've talked about it. Most dangerous team in the league, perhaps, when he's fully healthy. Adam says, well, take a look at my team. But, yeah, good spot for Mike to be in still.
For sure. All right, and we're going over now to Josh's matchup here against his wife, a battle of the Hugheses here in Week 9. Josh wins 106.92 to 98.04. Josh now goes to 5-4 on the season. Let me see if I got a noise for that. I don't even know if I do. Let's just do this one if it works. So we're giving Josh a clap here, a round of applause. Joe Burrow back to his old self here, 31 for 44, 348, and 2 touchdowns on the day here. Austin Eckler, 14 carries, 47 yards, and 2 touchdowns for a 20-point day against a stout New York Jets defense. Just looking down the board here, Garrett Wilson does get 13 targets, 7 catches, 80 yards. Chua Hubbard, 16 carries, 58 yards, gets a little bit involved in the passing game, scores a solid 8 points for what you're expecting there. And really just down the board here, nothing really much to talk about. So Justin Tucker here, 3 for 3 on field goal attempts, 4 for 4 on extra point attempts. Does get away with a win here for 106.92. So you'd like to see that. He is now 5-4 and looking to build on this momentum.
Yeah, and a household of 5-4s, 2 5-4s in the Hughes household now after Josh beats Sarah in this Week 9 tilt. Austin Eckler, gosh, I wasn't paying attention to fantasy scores last night, but this must have been Josh must have overtaken the lead in the late evening hours of Monday night as Eckler was Monday Night Football, 20 fantasy points. Really not great on the ground, under 4 yards a carry in this one, but does score twice. 2 for 7 for the passing game, so not quite right there. Something is still not quite right with Eckler, whether it's his health, whether it's his role in that offense, whether it's his just kind of tempo with Herbert. Something just doesn't seem quite right to justify the top 4 pick for Eckler, but he does enough here. Despite, as you mentioned, kind of mediocre performances, it's that problem of no touchdowns, right? None of these guys, Hubbard, Thielen, Wilson, Smith and Jigba, McBride, Lockett, none of those guys had touchdowns. So to be able to win a game, to go to 5-4, to beat your wife,
Jesus Christ,
that
sounds awful. It's just beating our wife in fantasy football, folks. Just fantasy football.
Add the clarifier there. Absolutely. Yeah, that certainly came out wrong. But hopefully he is going to buy Sarah dinner or do something nice for her, get her flowers, because, hey, 5-4, both of you guys are positioned to make a playoff run here. Joe Burrow is coming on if you're looking for signs of positivity beyond this week. Had some bye issues, right? Brandon Ayuk was on bye. Evan Engram was on bye. He's been a serviceable tight end one. So I think Josh in a pretty good position here. He needs the key to him maintaining his relevancy in this league right now. I think Garrett Wilson needs to at least maintain the level of play. I think when Rodgers went down, everyone thought, oh my gosh, Garrett Wilson's going to be awful.
Yeah.
He hasn't been the guy you drafted him to be, but he has been playing just well enough. Combine that with the performance from Thielen, coming into the season, you'd probably be expecting, the Thielen's numbers for Wilson and maybe vice versa. So you're still getting the production between those two guys. And Josh is 5-4, moving on.
Yeah, and I will say good news here for Josh. He did have Brandon Ayuk, Evan Engram, and the San Francisco defense on bye. So those are 3 positions you're going to slot directly back into your starting lineup for Week 10. So good there for Josh in Week 9, getting the win there. But then we look at Sarah's team here. It goes to 5-4, 98.04 on the day. This soundboard is not working very fast. Played the sad Price is Right music there for Sarah here. Now goes 5-4, as like I said. Starts Derek Carr here, 16 points. That's about his ceiling that you're going to get out of him week in and week out, especially with Tyson Hill running the show, who we're going to talk about later. Jerome Ford here, 10 points, 20 carries, 44 yards. You like the carries, but you don't like the efficiency there, but does get 10 points on the day. Kenneth Walker, some that probably needs to be watched out here. 49% snap percentage here. Zach Charbonnet is coming up, it looks like. I don't know if it's going to be more of a split, if Kenneth Walker's dealing with any injuries or what have you. But definitely something to keep an eye on there in Seattle. A.J. Brown has a nice day here, 7 for 9, 66 yards and a touchdown, continuing to prove that I am dead wrong about A.J. Brown, now the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football. Jahan Dotson here, 4 for 8, 69 yards and a touchdown. You like to see that out of him. And even David Njigba here, 4 for 6, 26 yards and a touchdown. Njigba, why did I say Njigba? It's Njoku. There. And then she has the Ravens defense, which is awesome. An interception, 151 yards allowed, 4 sacks. So a lot of positives here. And just looking at her bench here, Justin Fields coming back, Courtland Sutton coming back, Drake London probably coming back this week, and Samuel Porter coming back. So a lot of bench bye stuff, injuries coming back for Sarah here, and hopefully it will help her going forward in Week 10.
Yeah, very much in the Mike category of have a lot of guys missing right now, kind of hanging on to that 5-4 record there, just above 500, but does have some people that can be filled into this lineup. Tough week. I mean, hey, Kenneth Walker, just 9 carries, weird game script, getting crushed by the Ravens. Walker, though, the snap percentage was what's unfortunate. He had been in the 70s and 80s, and then all of a sudden in week 8 drops to 41, and then goes up, I guess, to 49 against the Ravens. Not only that, but just take a look at their schedule moving forward. So they've got Washington next week, but then they run into a murderer's row of defenses, especially against running backs. So you've got the Rams, you've got the 49ers, the Cowboys, and the 49ers again before a home matchup against Philadelphia, and then Tennessee. So really, really tough stretch for Seattle running backs. Maybe they're kind of slowing him down for the second half of the season to keep him healthy, thinking that they may need 2 running backs to go up against those really imposing defenses. But for sure, a little bit of a red flag for a guy that has been, one of the better running backs in the league this season. So definitely sign for concern there. And finally, Jahan Dotson, 14 fantasy points. He continues to be my biggest regret. Not really, because he was so bad at the beginning of the season. He's only recently come on the last 3 games, 8 targets or more in all 3 games, has a 20-point fantasy game sandwiched in there as well. So really nice to see Dotson coming on. Of course, Sarah is a Commanders fan, so nice to root for the root for her team and her fantasy team at the same time, and made some, I guess, okay decisions here. Had some options at running back on the bench. Chose to leave them there. Singletary, despite a projected significant workload, he only goes 13 for 26, 3 fantasy points. A.J. Dillon, 9 carries for 40 yards, 4 fantasy points. So not much else on the bench. So at least in a close matchup, it's not like, making one call or another would have handed her the victory over Josh. But I think things are going to be looking up once these players get back into her lineup.
For sure, and 5-4, with all these bye week issues, so not really too worried about it. You just hope that you can steal one, especially when you have all these players on bye, but it does not work out to be the case for Sarah in week 9. And now let's go over to our next matchup with yours truly, the Union Bridge Bay Sharks. Wow, that's a tongue twister that I should have not named my team after since I can't say it. I go to anyone 9-0 on the season. 9-0 on the season.
The only thing I'm addicted to right now is winning.
The only thing I'm addicted right now is winning. Charlie Sheen, thank you for that cameo on the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast. I beat Dustin here, who now goes to 5-4, 75.92 on the season, or in the week here. The low score of week 9. I have a sound for this. Hold on, give me 1 second. Where is it? There we go. It was just a giant fart because that is how Dustin's team went in week 9. So let's look at my team here. Justin Herbert in a tough matchup against the Jets here. 16 for 30, 136 yards, only 7 points on the day. Alvin Kamara kind of screwed over by Taysom Hill. 9 carries, 26 yards, 4 for 5 through the air, and 44 yards. Raheem Mostert over there in the Deutschland, 12 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown on the day. Tyreek Hill kind of slow for Tyreek Hill standards, 8 for 10, 62 yards, does have a fumble loss in this game. Deontay Johnson on Thursday night, 7 for 9, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid here, 10 for 11, 81 yards, and a fumble loss on, I think it was Sunday night against Cincinnati. And Joe Mixon here, not very efficient, but does get in the end zone, scores 50.30 points on the day here. I go to 9-0, can't complain. I am a little bit concerned about Justin Herbert here. Looking, of course it's not going to load because the website sucks, but the last couple of weeks hasn't had really the games that I wish he had. And I do have Kyler Murray waiting in the wings here. Will be interesting to see how he plays going forward if I do want to spice it up and maybe add Kyler Murray to the starting lineup in plus matchups.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least this week, the San Diego Chargers stack of Herbert and Quentin Johnson. Did I say San Diego? I was going throwback. I kind of wish they stayed in San Diego. San Diego is a cool city.
It's a beautiful city. Yeah, much better than LA.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
But enough on San Diego. This isn't a San Diego podcast.
Yeah. Don't want to talk about Manny Machado or any of those Padres. By the way, the Padres, I have to say, the most obnoxious fans all of a sudden in baseball. They got what was coming to them good and hard this season by not making the playoffs for sure. But anyway, the Chargers stack of Herbert and Quentin Johnson did not quite work out, despite the fact that Josh Palmer is injured and in your IR slot. So you do have him when he comes back. But you will also have Amon-Ra St. Brown when he comes back. He was on bye this week. So obviously one of your top players suffering the bye week at an inopportune time. But even despite that, despite the fact that Herbert had his worst game of the season, by the way, so did Alvin Kamara and so did Tyreek Hill, all of them the worst games that they've had all year from a fantasy point perspective, you still get the victory, 106 points. When you're lucky, you're just lucky, I guess. And Dustin, 75 points. What a shame. What a disappointment. He has to always beat me and then always proceed to get crushed by me. This has happened time time again. Lost my camera banging the table here because
He's
I'm
just
tired of
angry.
it, Adam. I'm really tired of losing to Dustin.
Do you want to go on a
And
30-second rant here about Dustin's fantasy
no,
football?
I'm just hoping I can get my
You're
camera
good.
fixed. There we go.
You're perfect. You look
Um,
beautiful.
No, I don't need a rant. It's just Dustin's teams are like they can be good and they can be awful, and usually they're awful except when they play me. But it's fine.
So,
It's whatever.
just a
But
little anecdote, just on terms of that. Back in high school, we used to play tennis in gym class, and I would smack every single person. And then I played Dustin, always lose. It was so frustrating playing him in tennis. I don't know what he would do, but he would just beat me every single time. So I can kind of feel you on that. But personal high school anecdote. Weren't expecting that in this podcast.
I
But
kind of was actually.
but just in terms of just my team as a whole, in terms of the luck portion of this, I do have the most points scored and the least points scored against. So it's been a very good ride for me so far. So I'm not complaining, but as the text thread said, I'm kind of like Lamar Jackson. I have to prove it in the playoffs at this point, and hopefully I can do so because as of right now, I'm the Marty Schottenheimer of the Beltway Wars Invitational. Can go 14-2 and lose in the first round of the playoffs. But let's
Just
look
be
at
glad you're not what's his name? What the hell is his name? He just got fired by the Raiders. Just be lucky you're not a Josh
McDaniels.
McDaniels. Boy, what a weird story. By the way, before we get off of this, I just want to point this out.
Yeah,
I don't know if you, with children, were able to wake up at 9:30 for
I did.
a Sunday morning game.
I
You
did,
did.
actually.
So you watched this game, presumably all of it,
Yeah.
with moderate care. You're probably distracted with, again, the kids.
I was
but-
laying in bed on the phone, basically, because I was up with the
Oh,
kids
on the
all
phone,
night,
okay.
and Kim got some morning shift.
Well-
So
I'm wondering, on your tiny screen, watching on your phone,
mhm.
did you notice what I noticed? So, which is that Raheem Mostert,
Yeah.
okay, he ends up with 12 for 85
Right.
and a touchdown. Great. Perfect game line, 14 fantasy points. I thought for the majority of that game, he did not look very good.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that has a little bit to do with Kansas City's front seven. I think they're above average. You heard Patrick Mahomes saying that they're the best defense in the league. I don't think I'm going to go that far, but they are a good defense. He does salvage it with a touchdown, and he does have good yards per carry here. 7 yards per carry. It looked like at the beginning of the game they're trying to figure out the role of Jeff Wilson. Like he wasn't kind of involved there, and you saw a little bit of Ahmed in there as well. But Mostert's way more talented than those two. It'll be interesting to see just how it shakes up when Achane comes back. But he's better than those two, and he's gonna get his touches. And I feel like the more touches he gets, the more chance he's gonna bust a 70-yard run. He's kind of like the home run hitter for me. So, I would say for most of that game, he looked pretty terrible, actually, if I'm going to be frank. But 85 yards, he ends up with the points, so can't complain there. But let's go over to Dustin's team here. Some bye-week blues here with Gibbs being on bye this week, which really would have helped him in this matchup because he starts Darrell Henderson, 10 for 19, nothing doing against Green Bay in that Rams backfield. I'm kind of interested to see what his snap count was. 60% snap count, so was involved in the offense, just did not do anything with his carries. As we mentioned before, Jonathan Taylor looked great. Gets 18 carries, 47 yards, involved in the passing game, gets a touchdown. Also interested in his snap count as well, 74%. So week 7, 50, week 8, 61, week 9, 74. So that positive regression that we're talking about at the expense of Zach Moss, that seems to be going. I can see 80% next week for Jonathan Taylor, so good news for Dustin here. Jamar Chase gets kind of banged up in this game. It looked like he fell backwards and kind of got the wind knocked out of him, but it says the news says day-to-day with a back injury. So something to keep an eye on for Dustin there. Puka Nacua does nothing without Matthew Stafford. He's hoping to get him back as soon as possible. Jalen Waddle continued up and down kind of season. Now the 23rd ranked wide receiver here. 3 for 6, 42 yards. Tyson Hill, which I kind of want to talk about here. 18 points out of the tight end position. I will be proposing a rule change next year that he can only be started in a quarterback spot. because he's not a tight end. He's more of a running back, I would say, if you're going to categorize him. But he does have tight end and quarterback eligibility, so he's definitely not a tight end. I wouldn't say that. So definitely kind of interesting there, but that's not a role this year, so good on Dustin for utilizing him in that position. Gabe Davis, zeros. It's just kind of weird with how talented he is. And starts the Giants defense, who scores a 0 here against that Raiders offense now under Antonio Pierce. So just kind of a rough day for Dust. But, you have, looking at his bench, he has Kyle Pitts, he has Marquise Brown, who he didn't start. With Kyler Murray, his stock is definitely going to go up. And Deshaun Watson here has a quiet good game here. 19 for 30, 2 touchdowns, 18 points. Sam Howell had 17 points, so not much production loss there, but does give Dustin another option in the future.
I suppose so.
I didn't say a good option. Just an option.
Yeah. So I just think some weird vibes for Dustin's team right now. Just some of these guys, you just kind of look at this week and their trajectory, their recent trajectory here in the last couple weeks. I mean, Darrell Henderson, just 10 carries. You were hoping that while Kyren Williams is on IR for Dustin's team, that Henderson would be a little bit better. He had a couple good weeks there, but just that snap percentage is down at 50 or 60%. You just hope that is starts to go up a little bit before Kyren Williams returns. Jamar Chase, I've heard mixed things about this injury. I've heard that he might miss a week, but just kind of not great to be having your best player on your team kind of suffer an injury midseason like this. Jalen Waddle also leaves this game. He has a couple injuries. He exited with a knee in the first quarter, has another injury or two that he's been nursing all year. So not great there. Puka Nacua, 3 for 7. You're wondering how bad is it going to be with a new quarterback there. I think we saw the answer with Ripon as quarterback, 3 for 7, just not great. Did sign Carson Wentz today. The Rams did. So potentially Nacua may have some improvement at the quarterback position. That's yet to be determined. Yeah. That could go either way for sure. But Gabe Davis, the 0. After the Bills finally utilized him in a much better way, he was very not Gabe Davis last week. He 9 for 12. By far his most targets on the season, probably of his career, the way they use him. Just down to 2 targets in this week. Played 93% of the snaps. I guess, I don't know whether Cincinnati decided to lock him up, but just really sucks after the week that he had to go such a high to low. I mean, you should be used to it at this point with Gabe Davis, but still hurts.
Yeah, for sure. But for good news for Dustin here, a lot of, still 5-4, still has a talented team. Gibbs going to come back, and he should maintain his role. Marquise Brown's stock definitely going up. So definitely some players that he can, and Kyren Williams probably coming back soon here for Dustin. So definitely some reinforcements on the way, and we'll probably be able to avoid the low score going forward. But just on an off note, I am interested to see what his video is going to be, since I don't think he's ever shotgun a beer in his life. And I don't think he's going to do that. So it'll be interesting to see what his drinking video is going to be for week 10.
Let me ask you before we move on, at the quarterback situation here, we have Sam Howell starting over Deshaun Watson in this one. Moving forward, so Watson, both of them have some tough matchups coming up. Watson has Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Denver. Really not great, especially Baltimore. But Howell has Seattle, the Giants, and the Cowboys. Would you pretty much keep going with Howell until Watson gets an easier matchup in like 3 weeks from now?
Yeah, I mean, you're starting him definitely next week. Cleveland has Baltimore. I don't think you're really starting anyone unless you have an absolute stud against Baltimore. So you're starting Howell there. The Giants are horrible. Just a horrible team as a whole. So you're probably starting at Watson has Pittsburgh. Yeah, I don't even like that one. And Denver is actually kind of a resurgent defense here. They've been playing much better in the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, you might not be starting Deshaun Watson in the next 3 weeks. I think I would go Howell for each of the next 3 weeks. But let's go over to our next matchup here. Is this our last matchup? I think it is. Yep, that is going to be Scott versus Tom here. Scott goes 5-4 on the season. Kind of had a slow start to the season, but now is back. I'm going to play the sound for Scott here. Hopefully it plays. Just a nice victory sound for Scott there. Already reusing sounds on my soundboard, so apologies there. Starts Will Levis here. Not a great day. Only 8 points. Sorry, 8 points. Does get the passing attempts, 39 attempts, but kind of a rough day against the Steelers. There was pressured a lot in that game. Tony Pollard continues to kind of be disappointing here. In a high-scoring game, only gets 12 carries, 51 yards, does not get in the end zone. Isaiah Pacheco also kind of just 16 carries, 66 yards. Cooper Kupp without Matthew Stafford. That whole Rams offense really suffered. 2 for 7, 48 yards. Michael Pittman, 8 for 8, 64. He'll take that every day of the week. DeAndre Hopkins, horrible efficiency here, 4 for 11, but does get 60 yards. Mark Andrews, who I think a lot of people have forgotten about Mark Andrews outside of Baltimore, but 9 for 10, 80 yards, now the number 2 tight end in fantasy football. And Amari Cooper really saves the day for Scott here, 5 for 5, 139, and a touchdown in the air. Just looking at Scott's bench here, does have Gus Edwards here, who I think still has value. Everyone's talking about Keon Mitchell, but Gus Edwards still has value around the goal line as well. Can probably be a flex option. Tyler Algier still getting carries, 12, 39, and a touchdown. So interesting there. And then Zach Charbonnet, as we were talking about with Kenneth Walker, kind of just an interesting stash here for Scott. Maybe he gets a little more run, especially if Seattle starts to falter in the run game like they did on Sunday.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how his snap percentage has gone up directly proportionate to Kenneth Walker's snap percentage going down. So now into the 50% range for Charbonnet. That's certainly great. Tough matchup, so difficult to gauge his performance. Just 4 for 8 on the ground. But, man, yeah, Gus Edwards, unfortunately, that performance comes on the bench for Scott. But and just 5 carries, but is able to do massive damage, gets into the end zone twice. Still feels like, as good as he's been, like to do that stat line on 5 carries, the fact that there are some other mouths to feed in that offense, it makes you kind of, I think you're still going to have hesitation in the back of your mind to some degree with Edwards in the lineup, but I think you probably have to get him into the flex after that one. Yeah, I mean, the lineup, hey, 94 points is not very much, but you could have even had fewer and gotten a victory here with as bad as Tom's team played. But Tony Pollard, I just wanted to point out, he is the 21st ranked running back in fantasy, drafted as in the second round as the 7th running back off the board. So, man, second round pick performing like this, just consistently mediocre for Pollard and has been for some time. Came out of the gates really well, but that was when he was getting 20 to 25 carries. Now he's consistently between 10 and 15.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see in the offseason if Dallas tries to make a splash like Derrick Henry or someone like that. And then Tony Pollard goes back to his role, which it was last year, which he was really effective at, being that change of pace back. He scored a lot of points because it doesn't look like he's a lead back in the NFL. I mean, just not really efficient. 4 yards per carry, but just looking at it, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. His best is 5.3 yards per carry in a game, and that's when he went against Arizona. So, yeah, just kind of disappointing all around for Tony Pollard in Dallas this year, especially with the hype that was surrounding him in the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing we should point out on this team, with Russell Wilson on bye, gives Will Levis, the rookie sensation from last week, the start, stacks him with DeAndre Hopkins. Those two Titans teammates put up 58 points combined last week. Unfortunately, this week, not the same story. 16 combined points for Levis and Hopkins in the Titans' loss to the Steelers this week in Week 9. So tough break there.
Yeah.
Trying to catch lightning in a bottle there, and it just didn't work for a second straight week for those two players.
Yeah, I just think I watched that game pretty closely. He was just hit so many times. They just need to protect him better. If they get time, if they go against a better defense to throw against, like look at next week, Tampa Bay, who just gave up 500 yards to C.J. Stroud. So definitely could have a bounce back. I don't know if you're trusting him. Next week, you got Russell Wilson on the bench. Does he have a bye? No, he had a bye this week. Goes against Buffalo. Not a great matchup. And then you have Gardner Minshew, the mustache, against New England. So maybe you are starting Will Levis this week against Tampa Bay. My last thing on Gus Edwards here, I'm a little higher on him than a lot of people are. Has scored a touchdown in his last 3 games, 1, 3, and 2 in his last 3 games. 10, he had 10 yards per carry. I don't think they're going to go away from him. I think it's going to be a thunder lightning kind of approach with him getting the inside carries, the goal line carries, things of that nature. And I think that's going to happen more often than you think, just because I think they really want to protect Lamar. He got a little banged up on Sunday, so I could definitely see Gus Edwards being a touchdown-dependent fantasy football player, but definitely someone that has value going forward. But let's go over to Tom's team here. 78.48 points. Nothing good for Tom here.
Get shit on!
Just played a sound there for him. Lamar Jackson, you look at the score here and, it looks great. If you just didn't watch the game and saw the score, you're like, wow, Lamar probably had like 20 to 30 points, but I only gets 11 here. 21 for 26, very efficient, but only 187. Does lose a fumble here. Does get 60 yards on the ground. The big spend of this week was Royce Freeman, 12 carries, 32 yards, nothing doing there in LA. Alexander Madison, 16 carries, 44 yards, does get in the end zone through the air. Stephon Diggs continues to be a stud, 6 for 7, 86 yards and a touchdown, 2-point conversion for the Octopus in that game. Zay Flowers kind of disappears alongside Lamar Jackson. Only gets 1 target in this game. Didn't really need him, but that's kind of something to keep in mind going forward. Garrett Everett, 2 for 2, 18 yards in that horrible game on Monday night. Just a lot to talk about here for Tom's team. Looking at his bench, C.J. Stroud, 41 points. The rookie throws for 470 yards, 5 touchdowns. Is it crazy to say you're starting C.J.
No,
Stroud over Lamar Jackson going forward? I mean, let's do what we're doing here. Let's look at the next 3 for Lamar. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chargers. So Cleveland's not great, but Cincinnati Chargers, you definitely move the ball against. Stroud has Cincinnati, Arizona, Jacksonville. So who are you starting the next 3? Because the Lamar Jackson 35-point game's coming. It's coming. You just can't have these 11-point games. So go ahead.
This is now 4 games out of 5 with Lamar Jackson under 18 fantasy points.
Yeah.
And that period of time coincides, at least for a couple games, with games where the Ravens offense has actually seemingly performed at its highest level. In that the Detroit game was the exception. That was his 33-point fantasy game.
Yep.
But here in the last couple weeks, Arizona, Seattle, the Tennessee game, the Pittsburgh game, just not those gaudy numbers. And, you have a favorable rest of the schedule for the Ravens. I think one of the easier schedules to finish the year of any NFL team, and the majority of those games are at home. There's only 3 more away games for the Ravens. So I think all things considered, I would feel rather foolish sitting Lamar Jackson. And Stroud, he's played really well, but just look at the last 4 games. The story's not that different. He has the one big blow-up game like Lamar did. His happened to be here in week 9, but before that, 12, 14, 14. So I think at the end of the day, you still rely on kind of what you know to be true more often than not. And we know Lamar has just a longer track record so far than Stroud. But it's definitely a conversation, and it's definitely not a crazy one.
Yeah, I just think Lamar's floor is now a lot lower than it used to be. Um, and I think that's more just in regards to just how well the Ravens defense is playing. I don't think there's going to be a lot of games where there's going to be a lot of shootouts against Baltimore, uh, especially some of the offenses he's playing here. I mean, Cincinnati, good offense. Chargers, they have problems, especially protecting the quarterback, giving Herbert time to throw. You still have San Fran here. So it's definitely an interesting conversation. I just think you have to cater your expectations for Lamar that he's going to have these games just because he's not going to need to do all that much to get a win here. I mean, 37-3, he didn't need to do much. He did enough to win, but, it's no longer just put the team on Lamar Jackson's back and then, he scores all those points. It's a lot more well-rounded now, and the defense is the number one defense in the league. So definitely interesting for Tom here. And also another thing, Tank Dell on the bench here, 6 for 11, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You probably have to find a way to get him in. Tank Dell, Zay Flowers. I mean, Zay Flowers he scored 1 touchdown this year. Last 3 games under 10 points.
It's tough. I mean, both of these guys are going to have their blow-up games. They kind of honestly feel like the same player to me to some degree. They're both going to have a couple games each season. Dell has already had several, probably more than Flowers had. He's got a 16, a 23, and a 26, so he's had 3, 15 or plus games so far.
I just feel that Tank Dell's going to have more opportunities when they get in the red zone just because our running game is so good and the Texans' running game is so bad. So I think within the 20s, you're going to have C.J. Stroud throwing the ball in regards to the Ravens where they're just going to run it down your throat. So just something. I think they're close. I do think they're close. It's the score line here is obviously 26-1, but 2 talented players. It's just you have to find the right week to play each one. It's kind of the dilemma that Tom's in. Tom's now 3-6. He was the leader in points at one point in the season and has really been struggling thus far. Since then, it's just been really rough for Tom.
Well, I'm going to ask you something real quick. So I have the draft board up. I want to play a little bit of a game here with Tom's team to try to find out why he's 3-6.
Okay.
And that game is I'm going to read his first 5 draft picks. And after each one, I want you to give me a 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 ranking for each of those, 5 being they're performing how you would expect them to perform given their draft.
So 5 is average, and below that is below average, above that's above average.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll start with the first pick, Stephon Diggs.
I would say an 8 or 9.
I would agree with that. How about Devontae Adams in round number 2?
I mean, I'd say a 3. I mean, he's wide receiver 16. Last 6 games has not gone over 10 points. Does have that huge game, that huge outlier of 35 in week 3. But other than that, it's kind of been tough sailing for Devontae here.
Right, and that 35 points really skews the season rankings and stats, right? Because, I mean, it's been rough. Okay, so with
I'd say 3, yeah.
Okay. How about Lamar Jackson in the 3rd round?
He's quarterback number 4. I'd say 5. I'd say average. I mean, you kind of drafted him, and he hasn't gone above or below what you kind of thought. There's been huge swings, but in the top 4 rounds, you're really drafting for consistency, and he just hasn't been consistent this year.
Okay, so after three rounds, we're kind of at 500, right? Translate that to a fantasy record. You're right about 500. All right.
Right.
Let's move on to the 4th round. Running back Dameon Pierce.
I mean, that's a 1, right?
And
what is Pierce? Hold on. Pierce is running back 42. Yep, that's a 1.
Yeah.
Especially when you're considering you go 0 running back here, you gotta have him as number 1. He is your number 1.
Then you go.
Yep.
Alexander Madison in round 5. Slightly better, right?
Or 2 or 3.
Running back running back 24, but not on talent and production on.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at last
workload.
year when he took over for Dalvin Cook. I mean, he looked great. I mean, it looks like really just the last week he had 18 points. If he was consistently getting 18 points, you'd be more than happy with that. But just hasn't been the case this year.
And so those misses at running back. I mean, then you go on to Montgomery and things at Waller and whatever, and it gets a little closer to 500. But those two picks, Pierce and Madison, may be the two most disappointing players in fantasy this year. And if you're wondering why, after those decent picks at the top of the draft,
I throw Bijan in there, but
yeah. Well, right. But he's not Dameon Pierce, number 42.
That's true.
Worthy, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
I don't know.
If you go that zero running back route, you need one of these guys to hit, and they just haven't.
They haven't.
You got to have Madison as the top 15. He's 24, and Pierce, where you're drafting him, he has to be top 12, right? I mean, and he's not even close. So that's kind of the story of Tom's team, just the lack of production and of the running backs and the inconsistent play of his quarterback just has really been hard for Tom in the last couple of weeks. But that is our show today. We kind of had some children technical difficulties, so I hope you don't even notice that, but that's fine. Let's just look at week 10 real quick. Who's playing who? I'm playing Josh here. I have a lot of people on bye, so could see my first loss. Sarah's playing Mike. Jake is playing Dustin. Alex is playing Tom. Scott is playing Brian. And you are playing Charlie, one of the bigger trash talkers of the week.
I will say, week 10 is going to be very important for a number of reasons. First of all, 4 excellent teams on bye. I believe it's the Chiefs, the Rams. Who else is it this week? It's 4 very, very good teams. Miami, and there's one more. But we have 5 teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational that are sitting at 5-4.
Yep.
So, at this point in the season, you are 1 and I am 2, and then you have 5-4 teams. That rounds out the playoff field at 7.
Yep.
So right now, that 5-4 mark, being above 500 is the cutoff right now for making the fantasy playoffs. So there's a whole host of teams that do not want to be 5-5 next week. Charlie would, because he will be if he wins, but the 5-4 teams, that is going to be a tough one to swallow, whoever takes the loss next week.
We got 2 5-4 teams playing each other, Sarah and Mike. I am playing a 5-4 team against Josh. Dustin's 5-4 is playing Jake, and that round, and then 5-4 Scott is playing Brian. So definitely going to see who can separate themselves from the pack in week 10. Maybe get a game up on some of these teams. Maybe it's going to end up in tiebreakers when it's all said and done, who gets in and who's out. But definitely interesting, and we hope to see you in week 10 back here, same time, same place, and we will catch you all later. Bye, everybody.
If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.